When my daughter Angela walked into the living room that morning, her eyes were puffy from lack of sleep, but her voice was sharp, almost mechanical, as if she had rehearsed the words all night. "Mom," she said, avoiding my gaze, "we're going tomorrow. I've sold your beach house." The words landed like stones on my chest. For a moment I couldn't breathe. That house wasn't just a piece of property. It was the place where her father, Robert, had poured his sweat into every corner, where summers had been filled with laughter, where Angela herself had learned to walk on the wooden porch. And now, with one single careless sentence, she had thrown it all away. I tried to keep my voice steady. "You sold it, without asking me." She crossed her arms, defensive already. It was the only option left. "Edward said the buyers wouldn't wait. We needed the money, and you weren't doing anything with the house anyway." Edward. The name was enough to ignite the fire in my chest. That man had poisoned my daughter's mind, convincing her that fast money and shallow luxury were worth more than family or dignity. He had dragged her to Europe with promises of wealth, only to leave her stranded in debts and humiliation. And now, even from afar, his shadow still lingered, guiding her to destroy what little heritage we had left. I clenched my fists under the table. "Angela, that house wasn't just walls and furniture. It was part of your father, part of us." She finally looked at me, her eyes burning with anger and shame all at once. "Don't guilt-trip me, Mom. I did what I had to do. You don't understand what it's like to have creditors calling every day, to wake up not knowing if you'll even have a roof over your head next month. Selling that house saved us." Saved us, the irony almost made me laugh. She thought selling our most precious memory to strangers was salvation. What she didn't know, what I had kept hidden from her all these months, was that Robert had left me with more than she ever imagined. More than one house, more than one bank account, more than enough to cover every debt, silence every creditor, and still secure her future. But I hadn't told her. Not yet. Because Angela needed to learn something far more important than financial security. "Angela," I said softly, "do you even know who bought the house?" She hesitated. Her voice lost some of its defiance. "Some agency. Edward handled the papers. It doesn't matter who bought it. What matters is that it's done." Done. She said it like a final verdict. But deep inside, I knew the story wasn't finished. I knew that one day she would discover the truth, that the secretivus wasn't as clean as she thought, that the beach house was never truly lost, and that her decisions carried consequences she couldn't yet imagine. That night, after Angela had stormed off to her room, I sat alone at the kitchen table. I opened the old wooden drawer where I kept Robert's letters, his carefully prepared documents, his secret accounts that Angela had never seen. I traced his handwriting with trembling fingers. "If anything happens to me, Anton," he had written years ago, "make sure Angela learns to stand on her own feet. Don't give her everything at once. Strength is born from struggle." And so I had stayed silent. I had let her believe we were poor, that we had nothing left but each other. I had watched her fall, watched her cry, watched her scramble for survival. It tore me apart every single night, but it was the only way. Now, with the beach house gone, or so she believed, I realized the lesson was far from over. Angela thought she had reached the bottom, but she hadn't yet understood the true weight of her choices. I poured myself a cup of tea, and looked out the window at the dark street. The house felt emptier than ever, as if Robert's presence had faded a little more with Angela's betrayal. But I whispered into the silence, "I will not give up on her. Not yet," because the truth was waiting, hidden in Mr. Peterson's office, sealed in files and contracts that could change everything. Angela believed she had sold our past, but she had no idea what future was about to unfold. And when the moment came, when I finally revealed the truth, she would either hate me for my silence, or thank me for saving her in the only way I could. The next morning, Angela was already gone when I woke up. Her coffee cup sat half-finished on the counter, lipstick smudged against the rim. She had scribbled a note on the back of an old envelope. "I'll be out with some friends. Don't wait up, friends." I knew what that word meant. It meant people who encouraged her to drink away her worries, people who filled her head with promises of quick solutions, people who had no idea of the storm she was dragging behind her. I folded the note and tucked it into my apron pocket, a silent reminder that my daughter was still lost. I spent the morning cleaning, though the house was already spotless. My mind was racing, replaying her words from the night before. "We're going tomorrow. I've sold your beach house." Each time I heard it in my head, it cut deeper, but the wound was not from losing the property. No, the pain came from realizing how little Angela valued what her father had left behind. At noon, Aurora came by. She was my neighbor, my confidant, my oldest friend. She carried a bag of fresh bread and a sharp look in her eyes. "You look pale, Antonia. What happened?" I wanted to shrug it off, but the truth spilled out. Angela sold the beach house. Aurora gasped, nearly dropping the bread. "Without asking you? That house was Robert's pride." "I know," I whispered, sinking into a chair, "but she thinks it was hers to sell." Edward filled her head with lies. "She believes she's saving us." Aurora shook her head. "Saving you? By tearing apart your memories? Antonia, this is madness." I stared at the table, unable to answer. I couldn't tell Aurora everything, not yet. She didn't know about Robert's hidden fortune, about the accounts he had carefully built over decades. Only Mr. Peterson and I carried that secret, and keeping it from everyone else was part of the plan. After Aurora left, I found myself drifting to the old photo albums. Page after page showed Angela at the beach house, her first sandcastle, her 16th birthday, the summer Robert taught her how to drive. Each photograph screamed of a life she had once cherished but now treated like disposable property. That evening Angela returned. Her eyes were red, her hair messy, her steps uneven. I smelled the alcohol before she even spoke. "Don't start, Mom," she muttered, tossing her bag onto the sofa. "I wasn't going to," I said quietly. "But I do need to ask, why do you keep running from me?" She froze, then turned with a bitter laugh. "Because you don't understand me. You never did. You sit here in this old house, clinging to Dad's ghost, while I'm out there fighting to survive. You think it's easy for me? Selling the beach house wasn't a choice, it was survival. Survival doesn't come from destroying what you love," I whispered. Her face hardened. "What I love? Don't you get it, Mom? Love doesn't pay bills. Memories don't feed you. Dreams don't erase debt collectors' threats." She stormed into her room, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. I sat in silence, my heart aching, but deep down I clung to one thought. She doesn't know the truth yet. One day she will. Later that night, when the house was quiet, I pulled out Robert's documents again. His handwriting seemed to echo in my mind. "Let her fall, Antonia. Let her see the ground. Only then will she learn to rise." It was the hardest advice I had ever followed. Watching my daughter spiral, watching her sell the very core of our family's history, was agony. But if I rescued her now, she would never learn. She would keep leaning on others, keep believing life owed her comfort without effort. So I made a silent vow. As I placed the papers back in the drawer, I would endure her anger, her mistakes, even her betrayal. Because one day, the truth would come to light. And when it did, Angela would finally understand that strength, dignity, and love were worth more than all the money Edward had ever promised her. That night, I prayed, not for money, not for the house, not even for myself. I prayed for my daughter's awakening, because the journey was only beginning. The following morning carried a strange stillness. Angela had already left the house before sunrise, saying she wanted to take care of some pending matters. I didn't ask, though my chest tightened with unease. Whenever she used vague words like that, it meant something impulsive was brewing beneath her fragile calm. I stayed in the kitchen, making tea, and trying to distract myself with simple chores, but my mind wandered endlessly. Around noon, Angela stormed back into the house. Her eyes were wide, her cheeks flushed, and she slammed her handbag on the table as if it had betrayed her. "Mom, She blurted out, "We're going tomorrow. I sold your beach house." The words sliced the room in half. For a second I thought I had misheard. My teacup trembled in my hands. "What did you say?" "You heard me," she insisted, her voice rising defensively. "I talked to a buyer. The papers are practically ready. By this time tomorrow, we'll have money in our pockets and a new beginning." I stared at her, feeling an avalanche of emotions press against my ribs. The beach house, Robert's pride, the place of family summers, of birthdays by the ocean, of quiet evenings watching the tide roll in. My voice came out softer than I expected. "Angela, that house wasn't yours to sell." Her eyes darted away. "I know, but I needed to do something." "You don't understand, Mom. I can't breathe in this suffocating cycle of debts and failures. If I don't move fast, I'll collapse." And that house, it was just sitting there, empty. "At least now it can save us." Inside, a storm raged. She didn't know the truth, that the beach house was already legally under my name again, secured quietly when Robert's hidden fortune surfaced. She had signed fraudulent papers with Edward months ago, but I had undone all of it with patience and lawyers. Still, I let her continue, watching the desperation spill from her words. "Angela," I said slowly, "do you realize what you've done? You've traded memories for coins, history for a chance to run from your mistakes." Tears welled in her eyes, but her chin stayed high. "Don't guilt me, Mom. I'm trying to fix my life. You of all people should want that. You raised me to survive, didn't you? Well, this is survival." I could have stopped her right there. I could have revealed the documents proving the sale was invalid, that she had no legal right, that the house remained safe in the shadows of Robert's planning, but I didn't. I kept the secret, because this was more than property. It was a lesson unfolding in real time. That night, Angela packed feverishly, tossing clothes into a suitcase. "Tomorrow," she kept muttering. "Tomorrow everything changes." I stood by the doorway, silent, observing the grown woman who was still, in so many ways, the frightened girl who had run after Edward's empty promises. Lying in bed later, I whispered to Robert in the dark, "She thinks she sold your house, my love. She believes she has broken the last piece of you, but what she doesn't know is that your legacy is stronger than her mistakes. Tomorrow, she'll begin to understand." The house creaked gently with the night wind. Somewhere in another room Angela cried quietly into her pillow, and I let her, because sometimes tears are the first honest payment toward wisdom. The morning arrived cloaked in restless tension. Angela was up before me, pacing the living room with her suitcase already by the door. Her face carried the determination of someone who had convinced herself there was no turning back. When I entered with a tray of coffee, she forced a smile, brittle and nervous. "Mom," she said, "I know you're angry, but once the money comes through you'll see. This is for the best." I placed the tray on the table and looked at her steadily. "Angela, rushing doesn't heal wounds. It only covers them with bandages that won't last." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't need another lecture. I need results. Edward left me drowning, and I refuse to stay at the bottom. Selling the beach house is the first real decision I've made for myself." I wanted to shout, to remind her of birthdays celebrated under that roof, of Robert's laughter echoing off the porch, of the sunsets we believed belonged to us alone. Instead, I swallowed the ache and kept my voice calm. "And what about the family we built there? What about the values tied to those walls?" Angela's eyes flickered with guilt before she hardened again. "Memories don't pay bills. I can't live on nostalgia, Mom. I need freedom." We left the house shortly after. Angela insisted on driving, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. I stared out the window, watching familiar streets blur past, each corner heavy with memories. She hummed nervously, as though sound could drown out doubt. At the lawyer's office she marched in with false bravado. The buyer's representative sat waiting, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a folder thick with papers. "Miss Brooks," he said, shaking her hand. "Everything is ready. Just a few signatures and the transaction will be complete. Angela glanced at me, seeking approval, but I only folded my hands in my lap. She scribbled her name on the documents, her pen trembling ever so slightly. When the man slid a check across the table, her eyes lit up with relief, as if salvation had been written in numbers. But I knew better. That piece of paper was nothing but temporary comfort, a fragile shield against the storm still brewing in her life. The sale itself was hollow, built on fraud Edward had orchestrated long ago. Angela was too blinded by desperation to see it. Walking out of the office, she clutched the check to her chest. "See, Mom? It's real. We're free." I forced a smile. If freedom could be bought so easily, everyone would have it. That night, back at home, Angela spread the money across the table, calculating plans aloud. We can pay the debts, rent a better place, maybe even travel for a while. I listened silently, the weight of the truth pressing heavier with each word. She thinks this money will rebuild her life, I thought, but true rebuilding doesn't start with checks or sales. It begins inside, with the courage to face your mistakes. When she finally went to bed, exhausted by her own excitement, I gathered the scattered bills and tucked them back into the envelope. Alone in the quiet, I whispered again to Robert, "She doesn't see yet, but she will. The house still belongs to us, and the lesson still belongs to her. Tomorrow the cracks will begin to show." The lamp flickered once before I turned it off, and in that darkness I felt the heavy patience of a mother who must watch her child fall before she can truly rise. The following days unfolded like a fragile illusion. Angela was radiant with energy, as though the check in her purse had resurrected her from the dead. She spoke quickly, made lists on scraps of paper, and filled the air with grand plans. "Once I pay off Edward's debts, I'll finally breathe again," she told me over breakfast, her hands fluttering like restless birds. I stirred my tea slowly. "And after the debts?" "After?" She blinked, as though the question hadn't occurred to her. "Well, then I'll start over. Maybe invest. Maybe rent something in the city. The money will give me time to figure it out." I bit back the truth pressing at my lips, that money spent on patching holes disappears faster than water through a sieve. She wasn't ready to hear it, not yet. That afternoon, Angela visited the bank. I accompanied her, pretending to be the helpless widow she still believed me to be. She sat across from a financial advisor, her confidence wavering as she laid the check on the desk. The advisor adjusted her glasses, flipping through papers. "Miss Brooks, with debts of this magnitude, you'll need to prioritize. Which creditors are most urgent?" Angela hesitated, her cheeks coloring. "I don't know." I leaned back, watching the advisor sketch out a plan. "Pay off the debts tied to property first, then address the smaller loans later." Angela nodded vigorously, scribbling notes, her brow furrowed in concentration. Outside the bank, she clutched her notebook like a lifeline. "See, Mom, I'm learning. I can do this." I smiled gently. "Learning is good, Angela, but remember there's a difference between advice and wisdom. One is given, the other is earned." That night, she spread all the bills across the kitchen table. She muttered numbers under her breath, arranging them into neat stacks. I sat nearby, knitting quietly, though my eyes lingered on her tense shoulders. Every so often she groaned, erasing figures, starting again. Finally she threw down her pen. "It's impossible. Even if I use every cent, it won't cover everything." Her voice cracked, the triumphant confidence of the sale collapsing into raw frustration. I reached over and placed my hand on hers. "Sometimes, darling, you can't pay for peace with money. Sometimes it demands something else." She pulled her hand back, tears welling in her eyes. "What else do I have left, Mom? I've sold the only thing worth anything. What more can I give?" I didn't answer. The lesson had to bloom on its own, like a flower forced through stone. 2 days later, Mr. Peterson called me with an update. His voice was grim. "Mrs. Brooks, Edward's debts are deeper than expected. Some accounts were created using forged signatures. Your daughter's, to be precise. My stomach tightened, meaning she is legally responsible. Exactly. Unless we can prove fraud, she may be liable for everything. We'll need evidence, and a strong case. A specialized lawyer could cost $50,000, perhaps more. I understand, I said softly. Do what must be done, but don't tell Angela yet. After I hung up, I found Angela hunched over the kitchen table again, staring at the jewels Robert had left behind. She picked up a necklace, running the chain through her fingers like sand. Maybe if I sell these too, she whispered. It won't fix everything, but it will help. I felt my chest tighten. Even in the face of ruin, she reached for sacrifice, not reflection. She was willing to trade the very legacy of her father to cover the sins of a man who had abandoned her. Angela, I said quietly, once you sell these, they're gone forever. Is Edward's shadow really worth erasing your father's memory? Her eyes filled with anguish, but she pressed her lips into a thin line. What choice do I have? That night, long after she had gone to bed, I lingered in the kitchen, staring at the jewels laid bare on the table. They glittered under the weak light, silent witnesses to the cycle of desperation consuming my daughter. Patience, I told myself. She must fall until she can no longer bear the weight. Only then will she rise. Not for Edward, not for debts, but for herself. I blew out the lamp, leaving the jewels in darkness. Tomorrow, I knew, would bring her closer to that breaking point. The morning air was thick with unease. Angela barely touched her breakfast, stirring her coffee until it went cold. She had circles under her eyes, proof that she had slept little, if at all. When I asked if she was feeling well, she brushed me off with a weak smile. I'm fine, Mom, just thinking. But I could see the cracks forming. The weight of Edward's debts, the strain of balancing bills, and the emptiness left by selling the beach house, all of it gnawed at her spirit. Later that day, she received a call from an unknown number. She hesitated before answering, her knuckles whitening around the phone. I watched her expression shift from confusion to dread. Yes, this is Angela Brooks. No, I didn't sign that. What? No, that's not possible. She hung up, trembling. It was a collection agency. They said one of the loans has my signature, but I've never seen it before. Mom, Edward must have forged it. I placed a steadying hand on her arm. We suspected this. It's why we need evidence, Angela. Truth has a way of surfacing, even when lies bury it deep. Her eyes brimmed with tears. But if they take me to court, if they prove it's mine, I'll lose everything. I'll go to jail. I held her close, stroking her hair like I had when she was a frightened child. Listen to me. You are not Edward. His sins are not yours. The law may try to bind you, but the truth will defend you. That evening, Angela insisted we visit the beach house one last time before the buyer finalized renovations. I just need to see it again, she said, her voice quivering with a mix of regret and longing. The drive was quiet. When we arrived, the house stood tall against the crashing waves, unchanged yet entirely different. Its walls still carried the laughter of summers past, but the air felt heavy with what had been lost. Angela walked slowly through each room, her fingers tracing familiar patterns on the wallpaper, pausing at photographs still nailed to the walls. I thought selling this would free me, she whispered. But it feels like I've sold myself instead. She sat on the porch, staring at the horizon. Dad built this with his own hands, and I've Fergo. His daughter reduced it to cash for a man who lied to me. What kind of person does that make me? I sat beside her, my hand over hers. It makes you human, Angela. Flawed but not broken. What matters is what you do after realizing your mistake. The sun dipped lower, painting the ocean in hues of fire and gold. For the first time, Angela allowed herself to cry freely, her sobs mingling with the sound of the tide. Mom, she choked out. What if I never learn? What if I keep falling for lies, for promises that sound sweeter than reality? Then you'll keep standing back up, I said firmly. Falling doesn't define you, Angela. Rising does. That night, back home, she lingered by the window, staring at the moon. I could see the storm inside her, but also the faintest spark of strength beginning to glow. She wasn't free yet, but she was finally questioning, finally doubting the path she had chosen. Before bed, she whispered, almost too softly for me to hear, maybe freedom isn't money. Maybe it's something else. I smiled in the dark. Yes, my child, I thought, you're beginning to understand. Angela woke earlier than usual, her restlessness dragging her from bed before dawn. I found her in the kitchen, staring at a half-written letter. She tried to cover it with her hand, but I caught a glimpse of the first line to the court. You're preparing a statement, I asked gently. She sighed, defeated. If Edward forged my name, then the truth has to come out in front of everyone. I'm tired of hiding, Mom. Tired of running. Her determination was fragile, but it was there. I admired her courage, though. Part of me feared what exposure would bring. That afternoon she received another call, this time from Edward himself. The number was foreign, but his voice was unmistakable. Angela, darling, please, you must help me. They're threatening me in prison. If you send money, I can. She cut him off, her voice sharp. No, Edward. You've stolen enough from me, from us. Don't call again. I could see her hands shaking as she hung up, but instead of collapsing, she exhaled deeply. That felt good. For once I said no. The following days were filled with small but significant steps. Angela found part-time work cleaning offices downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. She came home tired, yet with a sense of quiet pride. I earned this, she said, showing me the first modest paycheck. Not Edward, not anyone else, me. Still, shadows lingered. The collection agencies circled like vultures, and the fear of court weighed heavily on her. One evening, while sorting through old boxes, Angela discovered a folder Robert had kept, our family's legal documents, meticulously organized. Tucked inside was something unexpected. Copies of Edward's forged papers, documents Robert must have suspected years earlier. Her hands trembled as she examined the handwriting. Mom, this is proof. Dad knew. He must have kept these in case something like this happened. Tears blurred her vision, but for once they weren't just of sorrow. They were of relief. He protected me even now. We spent that night piecing together every scrap of evidence. Angela worked with a focus I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. It was about reclaiming her dignity. A week later, she asked if we could return to the beach house once more. Not to mourn it, she clarified, but to say goodbye properly. We went together, bringing a picnic basket. Sitting on the porch Robert had built, Angela unfolded her plans. I've been thinking, what if this house isn't just ours? What if we turn it into a shelter for women like me, women who've lost everything and need a safe place to begin again? Her voice shook with passion. It would honor Dad. It would make up for what I did when I sold it. This house shouldn't just be walls and memories. It should be hope. I looked at her, my heart swelling with pride. She was no longer speaking as a desperate daughter, but as a woman who wanted to transform pain into purpose. The waves crashed rhythmically in the distance, as if applauding her resolve. That night, back home, she said quietly, Mom, for the first time since everything happened, I feel like I can breathe. And I knew then, the storm was beginning to pass, and my daughter was learning to stand tall in its aftermath. Angela's new routine brought a rhythm to our days. She woke before sunrise, packed her small bag, and left for her cleaning job downtown. When she came home in the evenings, her face was tired but calmer, her hands rougher but steadier. I watched her carefully. This was the first time she was truly earning her way, and though the work was humble, it gave her something she hadn't felt in years. Dignity. One Friday evening, she came back holding an envelope. My first full week's pay, she announced, placing it on the table. She didn't open it, didn't count the bills. She just looked at it with quiet pride. It's not much, Mom, but it's mine. Every cent is mine. I smiled, remembering Robert's words long ago. Money earned by your own hands carries a different weight than money handed to you. Still, not everyone understood. At the market, some neighbors whispered behind our backs. Rumors about my finances were spreading, about Angela's sudden visits to Mr. Peterson's office, about debts mysteriously disappearing. Aurora came by one afternoon with a worried expression. Antonia, people are talking. They say you were never poor, that you've been hiding something all along. Is it true? I hesitated, but Aurora had been my friend for 40 years. She deserved honesty. I poured her tea and told her everything. The hidden inheritance, Robert's foresight, my plan to let Angela learn her lesson. Aurora listened without interrupting, her eyes wide. When I finished, she shook her head slowly. Antonia, what you did, it's cruel and wise at the same time. Cruel because you let your daughter suffer, but wise because now look at her. She's stronger, humbler, more alive. Maybe she needed that suffering. That evening, Angela overheard us talking. She joined us sitting down beside me. Aurora's right. It hurt, Mom. It hurt more than I can explain. But if you had given me money back then, I would have wasted it the same way. I needed to face the emptiness to understand the value of what I had. Aurora smiled softly. You remind me of your father, Angela. He had that same fire in his eyes when he spoke about responsibility. The weeks passed, and Angela began to change in ways I hadn't expected. She started staying late after work, helping her coworkers. One evening she came home late and explained, one of the women I work with couldn't afford daycare for her little boy. I gave her part of my pay, just until she gets back on her feet. I stared at her, moved. Angela, that's generous, but you don't need to. I know, she interrupted. But Mom, when I had nothing, you gave me shelter. Now that I have something, even if it's small, I want to share it. It makes me feel free. That was when I realized she wasn't just learning to rebuild her own life, she was learning to help others rebuild theirs. One Sunday morning, we returned to the beach house. Angela walked through the rooms again, but this time there were no tears. Instead, she brought a notebook filled with sketches and plans. This will be the women's shelter, she said firmly. 2 bedrooms can become dormitories. The living room can serve as a common space. The kitchen is already perfect. We can start small, Mom. A few women at a time. Safety, warmth, a fresh start. Her conviction was contagious. I could almost hear Robert's laughter in the walls, as if blessing the idea. That night, Angela said something that stayed with me. Mom, I used to think wealth was about having more than others. Now I know real wealth is about giving others the chance to stand again. That's what I want to do with my life. And for the first time in many years, I believed her. She was no longer the daughter begging for rescue. She was becoming a woman others could rely on. Autumn arrived with crisp mornings and golden leaves drifting across the yard. Angela's schedule was demanding, but she carried herself differently now. Her posture was straighter, her voice calmer, her eyes clearer. Each day she left for work, she no longer seemed like someone burdened with punishment, but rather someone determined to build a new chapter with her own strength. One evening she returned home later than usual, carrying a second-hand laptop. It's for school, she explained. I've enrolled in night classes, social work. I want to understand the systems that failed me, and I want to learn how to help others through them. I felt a lump in my throat. The same daughter who once thought a luxurious condo in Europe was the measure of success was now eager to sit in a classroom with tired workers and single mothers, chasing education not for prestige but for purpose. Her transformation wasn't lost on others. Aurora often came by to check on us, her sharp eyes full of curiosity. One Friday she sat with us over tea, watching Angela study at the table. Antonia, I must tell you, when you first told me about your plan, I thought you were heartless. But now, she gestured toward Angela. Now I think you are the bravest mother I know. Look at her, she's not only alive, she's thriving. Angela overheard and looked up with a smile. Don't give Mom all the credit. I had to make choices too, but she gave me the space to make them. Even when it hurt. Aurora nodded thoughtfully. Space. That's harder to give than money. The following week, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from Edward. My stomach tightened as Angela tore it open. He wrote from a French prison, claiming remorse, asking forgiveness, promising he had changed. Angela read the letter silently, then set it aside. I don't feel anything, she said simply. Not anger, not pity. That part of my life is gone. I won't reply. I studied her face carefully. There was no bitterness there, only a steady calm. You've grown stronger than I ever imagined, I whispered. She shook her head. I just finally understand the difference between love and illusion. Edward told me what I wanted to hear. You, Mom, you told me what I needed to learn. That's love. Her words pierced me, because they revealed the very truth I had been hoping she would one day see. Love wasn't indulgence. Love was guidance, even when it came cloaked in hardship. As weeks turned into months, Angela balanced her cleaning job, her night classes, and her commitment to helping others. She began drafting a proposal for the foundation we had discussed, mapping out how the beach house could be converted into a shelter. She consulted with her professors, reached out to local organizations, and even organized a small fundraising event at her workplace. The women she worked with, once just co-workers, now admired her determination. Your daughter has a gift, one of them told me when I visited. She doesn't just clean floors, she lifts spirits. I went home that night feeling Robert's presence more than ever. He had always believed Angela had hidden strength. It took heartbreak, betrayal, and the illusion of poverty to uncover it, but here it was, shining at last. One quiet evening, Angela sat beside me on the porch, her notebook spread across her lap. Mom, I want to ask you something. Will you help me run the shelter when it opens? Tears filled my eyes. Of course, nothing would make me prouder. She leaned her head on my shoulder. Then it's decided. The house that once represented everything I threw away will now represent everything I've learned to cherish. The sea roared gently in the distance, as if agreeing with her. For the first time in many years, I felt not only peace, but also excitement for the future. Our story was no longer about loss, it was about renewal. Winter settled in with its long nights and frosty mornings. Angela wrapped herself in her old wool coat as she hurried between her job, her classes, and the foundation meetings. Yet even in the coldest weather there was a warmth in her presence that hadn't been there before. One evening, as snowflakes drifted outside the kitchen window, she came home carrying a folder full of papers. Mom, I've been working on the official proposal for the shelter, she said, laying it on the table. The university is willing to sponsor it as part of my graduate project, but I need you to sign as co-director. I flipped through the neatly typed pages. The plan was thorough: budgets, partnerships, safety protocols. Angela had thought of everything. Robert would be so proud, I whispered. Angela smiled. Then let's make him proud together. In the following weeks we drove to the beach house more often, checking repairs and preparing rooms. The old living room where Robert once read the newspaper would now serve as a counseling office. The upstairs bedrooms would be converted into safe spaces for women and their children. Even the garden had a new purpose. Angela suggested turning it into a small community plot where residents could grow vegetables, a way of learning self-reliance. Aurora came with us one Saturday, inspecting the work with her usual sharp eye. This place feels different already, she said. Like it's waiting to welcome its new purpose. Angela nodded. That's exactly what I want, a place where broken lives can breathe again. Meanwhile, the neighborhood began to whisper more loudly. People wondered how I had managed to recover the beach house, how Angela had cleared her debts, how suddenly we seemed less desperate than before. At the market, an old acquaintance approached me and asked bluntly, Antonia, were you hiding something from us all along? I only smiled. Sometimes life has more layers than people realize. Angela overheard later and confronted me gently. Mom, are you ashamed of letting people know the truth? I shook my head. Not ashamed, just cautious. People love gossip more than truth. She nodded slowly. Then let's show them the truth, not with words but with actions. Once the shelter opens, no one will doubt where our priorities lie. That winter also brought a surprising moment. Angela was invited to speak at her class about resilience. Nervous but determined, she stood in front of her peers and shared her story. Not the details about money or secrets, but the essence of what she had learned: that dignity could be rebuilt, that love sometimes looked like tough lessons, and that true wealth wasn't measured in currency, but in compassion. Her classmates applauded, and her professor later pulled me aside. "Your daughter has the heart of a leader. She doesn't just tell stories, she transforms them into hope." I went home that night with tears in my eyes, whispering to Robert, "She's becoming everything we dreamed of." On Christmas Eve, we lit candles in the living room and prepared a simple dinner. For the first time in years, Angela and I celebrated without tension, without hidden pain. Over dessert, she held my hand. "Mom, I've been thinking maybe next year we can invite the first group of women to spend Christmas at the shelter. No one should feel alone during the holidays." I squeezed her hand. "That's the most beautiful gift you could give." Snow continued to fall outside, covering the garden in silence, but inside our home there was only warmth, laughter, and peace. The storm of betrayal and loss was behind us. Ahead, a new season was waiting, one built not on illusions, but on truth, respect, and unconditional love. Respect and unconditional love. Spring arrived quietly, painting the garden with soft blossoms. The days grew longer, and with them, Angela's determination seemed to bloom as well. She was no longer just my daughter struggling to survive. She had become a woman with vision, discipline, and courage. Every morning after coming home from her night shift, she would sit at the kitchen table, poring over her textbooks with a steaming cup of coffee. The exhaustion on her face was obvious, yet so was the light in her eyes. She had a goal now, and that goal gave her strength. One afternoon, she came rushing in, cheeks flushed with excitement. "Mom, the city council approved the partnership. They're going to provide funding for our shelter." She hugged me tightly, almost spinning me around like she used to when she was a child. I laughed through tears. "Angela, you've done it. Your hard work is paying off." She shook her head. "Our hard work, Mom. You believed in me when no one else did." That belief carried me further than any money ever could. We began spending more time at the beach house, overseeing the renovations. Old wallpaper was stripped away, the squeaky floorboards repaired, the windows polished until they gleamed with light. Volunteers from Angela's classes and her co-workers came to help, painting walls and assembling furniture. The house slowly transformed into something more than a building. It became a promise. One Saturday, while scrubbing the porch railings, Angela paused and looked out at the ocean. "Do you ever feel Dad is still here, watching us?" I set my rag down, gazing at the horizon. "Every day, especially now." He always dreamed this house would mean more than just summer vacations. He wanted it to hold memories that shaped lives. "I think this," I gestured at the bustling volunteers, "is exactly what he would have wanted." Angela smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "Then let's make him proud." Not everyone in the neighborhood understood. Some whispered that we were showing off, others said we were reckless to open our doors to strangers. Aurora defended us fiercely, reminding them that generosity had always been Robert's legacy. And now she told them sharply, it is Angela's legacy too. One evening, Angela came home with an idea burning in her mind. "Mom, I want to organize a community dinner at the beach house before it officially opens. A way to show the neighborhood that this isn't a threat, but a blessing." It was a bold plan, but we embraced it. Over the next 2 weeks we cooked, decorated, and invited families, church members, and local officials. On the evening of the dinner, the house glowed with lanterns and laughter. Children played in the garden, neighbors shared stories, and for the first time, the building that once symbolized loss radiated hope. Angela stood up to give a small speech. Her voice trembled at first, but then grew firm. This house was once just my family's. Now it belongs to every woman who needs a safe place to begin again. We are not here to erase anyone's past, but to build a future where no one has to face hardship alone. The applause was thunderous, and in that moment I saw her not as my daughter, but as the leader she was becoming. Later that night, after the guests had left, we sat on the porch watching the stars. Angela leaned against me. "Mom, do you realize what we've done? We've turned pain into purpose." I stroked her hair gently. "Yes, Angela, and that purpose will outlive both of us." The sea whispered softly, carrying Robert's memory with every wave. For the first time in many years, I felt his presence not in sorrow, but in joy. We had kept his promise, and Angela had found hers. Summer approached with the scent of salt water, and the echo of seagulls above the shore. By then, the beach house no longer looked like a memory of the past, it had become a beacon of hope. The paint was fresh, the garden alive, and every room carefully prepared for the women who would soon find shelter within its walls. Angela was tireless. Between her studies, her job, and the renovations, she hardly slept, yet she never complained. Sometimes I worried she was pushing herself too hard, but when I saw the glow in her eyes, I understood. She was being carried by purpose, not by pressure. One late afternoon, we sat on the porch, enjoying a rare moment of quiet. The sea stretched endlessly before us, shimmering with golden sunlight. Angela held a notebook on her lap, filled with scribbles and plans. "Mom," she said softly, "do you think people can really change? I mean deep inside, after everything." I looked at her, seeing the mixture of hope and doubt in her face. "Yes," I said. "I think people can change when they truly face themselves, but not everyone chooses to. That's the difference." She nodded slowly, staring at the horizon. "Sometimes I wonder if Edward could ever change. If he'll ever understand the harm he caused." "Maybe he will," I answered. "But whether he does or not is no longer your burden. You've built a life beyond him. That's your victory." Angela smiled faintly, and I saw the weight lift a little from her shoulders. The official opening day of the shelter arrived like a festival. Neighbors, council members, church leaders, and even the mayor came to cut the ribbon. There were flowers everywhere, music playing, and laughter spilling through the air. For a moment I thought of Robert. How proud he would have been to see his daughter lead such a transformation. Angela gave a speech, her voice steady, her hands firm. "This house was once a place of loss for me," she said. "But now it stands as a place of healing. To every woman who walks through these doors, you are not broken, you are beginning again." Tears filled my eyes, and I wasn't the only one. Applause roared across the garden, echoing against the waves. That evening, after the guests had gone, Angela and I walked through the quiet rooms. The beds were made, the shelves stocked with books and blankets. It felt peaceful, almost sacred. We paused in the living room where Robert's favorite chair still stood. Angela touched the armrest gently. "Do you think Dad knows?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I don't think." I smiled. "I know he does." Just then, the first residents arrived, a young mother with 2 children, eyes weary but filled with cautious hope. Angela greeted them warmly, guiding them to their rooms. I watched as the little boy ran to the window, staring wide-eyed at the ocean. His laughter filled the house, and I felt my heart swell. Later that night, when the family had settled in, Angela whispered to me, "This is it, Mom. This is why it all happened. Every mistake, every loss, it led us here." I hugged her tightly. "Yes, Angela. Life doesn't always give us what we want, but sometimes it gives us exactly what we need." As the moon rose high above the waves, I realized something profound. We had not only rebuilt a house, we had rebuilt ourselves. And for the first time since Robert's passing, the house didn't feel empty. It felt alive. Autumn painted the coast in shades of gold and crimson. The air grew cooler, the nights longer, yet inside the beach house there was warmth unlike anything I had ever known. The shelter was alive with stories, laughter, and the quiet resilience of women rebuilding their lives. Angela had taken full charge of the program, balancing her studies, her work, and her role as director. I often marveled at her strength. The young woman who once sold her family's legacy for a man's empty promises was gone. In her place stood a leader, a builder, a healer. One evening, as we prepared dinner for the residents, Angela turned to me. "Mom, do you ever think about how different things could have been if I hadn't made all those mistakes?" I set down the wooden spoon and met her eyes. "Angela, don't call them mistakes, call them lessons. Every wrong turn led you here. Without them, would you have discovered this strength inside you?" She was quiet for a moment, then smiled softly. "Maybe you're right. Maybe pain is just another kind of teacher." That night after dinner, the women gathered in the living room. Some shared stories of escape, others of dreams they now dared to chase. Angela listened with such tenderness, offering advice where she could, offering silence where it was needed. Watching her, I realized she had become not just my daughter but a beacon for others. Weeks later, we hosted a celebration marking 3 months since the shelter opened. The garden was decorated with lanterns, music floated through the air, and children ran across the porch Robert once built. At one point, Angela stood on the steps and raised her voice above the crowd. "This house began as a symbol of family," she said. "Then it became a symbol of loss, but today it is a symbol of rebirth. Not just for me but for everyone who walks through its doors. My father built these walls with love, and now they hold love again." Applause filled the night and I felt my heart swell with pride. Later, as the celebration faded, Angela and I sat together on the porch, gazing at the moonlit ocean. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Mom, I finally understand what Dad meant when he said a home is only when it shelters love." Tears blurred my vision, but they were tears of joy. "Yes, Angela. And you've made that truth shine brighter than ever." Silence settled between us, gentle and comforting. For the first time in years, I spoke to Robert in my heart. "We did it, my love. Our daughter found her way. She is stronger than we ever imagined." And in the rhythm of the waves, I felt his answer. I always knew she would. From that night on, the beach house was no longer a relic of the past. It was the heart of a community, a place where brokenness turned into strength, where endings became beginnings. Angela had sold the house once, believing she was chasing happiness, but in reclaiming it, she discovered something far greater. She discovered herself, and so did I.